Hello and welcome, Horror Hounds, to another exciting episode of Cadaver Dogs Podcast. Today we have an absolute treat with you with two of the main horror directors of all of horror cinema. Together they're going to clash as we dissect two insane films, both of which were directed in the early 90s. I'm Rob Pasercha.
I'm Devin Shepard.
And I'm David B. Jacobs.
And we are Cadaver Dogs.
Woo!
Woo!
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Do you know what you're going to be for Halloween?
I'm always a wizard.
Rob, the point of a Halloween costume to be something different than you are in real life.
Well, the costume gets better every year, you know? So, our first film has to deal with the way we view reality and some other really cool, kind of like slimy, gross things. Telling us about that is David B. Jacobs.
Reality is not what it used to be. John Trent, an insurance claims investigator, is hired to track down a prominent horror novelist by the name of Sutter Kane, a loose combination of Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft, mostly Lovecraft. Trent, played by Sam Neill, suspects the whole disappearance is a publicity stunt and discovers a hidden map on the covers of Kane's work. Teamed with Linda Stiles, who works for the publisher and is a huge fan of Sutter Kane, Trent follows this map to Hobbs End, a town from the books which is supposed to be fictional. But then it seems there are a lot of things that should be fictional and are apparently not, like, all the demons running around. It turns out that Kane has always been influenced by unseen elder beings which have been using his writings as a way of entering the corporeal world and redesigning reality. His latest book is In the Mouth of Madness, starring John Trent himself. Seems even our protagonist did not exist before Kane wrote him. And now, as more people read the book, the world will descend further into madness as the old ones claim their throne. And for those who don't read books, there's a movie. It's directed by John Carpenter. It's actually the second time we've covered a John Carpenter movie, so I think he's the first director we've covered twice.
Yeah, get it. I mean, fitting. Very fitting.
Yeah, very fitting. It would be Carpenter. We're going to cover him again, don't worry.
We are.
Okay, so I have to admit, I don't want to toot my own horn or sound like I'm bragging here, but usually psycho thesis movies I can understand pretty well and I get what they're going for. I was so confused during this whole movie, and I just got so angry because I was like, I should be able to understand this. Why don't I get what's going on? And I got so mad. Okay, so I guess my first question is, who is actually real in this world? If this is an entire world that is written by Sutter Kane, is anyone real? Did you guys get this film?
That is an interesting question, because, for instance, Stiles was
Right.
written out of the story.
How could he write her out if she, causes things to happen? Then don't things not happen because she wasn't actually there and was written out? And then, if she's the publisher or, the editor of his book, who actually edits his book? And, is Sutter Kane real?
Because at this point, reality is just non-linear, right? It's shifting around based on what the old ones do with Sutter Kane. I mean, if you ask me, I would say that his name's John, right? John is not real because Sutter Kane told him I wrote you in. So John didn't exist before the story existed. But I think Charlton Heston did. And I think also his original publisher did. But Stiles, I think Stiles existed till he wrote her out. I think John's the only one that didn't exist.
I agree with you. It's interesting because I think the only character who we actually get a firm answer on is John Trent himself. I don't think anyone else in the movie has a clear answer as to whether or not they existed before Sutter Kane wrote them. The very first scene in the movie, the opening credits, is literally the typewriter going. It's him writing the book, which sets everything up. I love that that's the opening because literally nothing can happen until he writes it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
It's also weird how so many characters are aware of the way they're written and they start commenting on it towards the end. Especially in Hobbs End when that father character shoots himself in the face.
Yep.
Which, by the way, come on, why didn't they show his head explode?
No, it was so much more effective without it, I think.
It is. It is more effective without it. He shoots himself, and as he does, he says, "I have to. He wrote me this way." What's especially interesting is that Sutter Kane would have also written him saying, "I have to. He wrote me this way."
Right.
Yeah.
Because Sutter Kane is his own character in his own book. And I'm like curious if Sutter Kane has to write himself as his own character, how does he get to control what, like, that's confusing to me.
Right. So Sutter Kane isn't writing every single detail that happens in the world because it's some sort of prose. So there's got to be some dialogue that's being said that isn't written down, and
That's
some
true.
things that are happening like that aren't
Right.
described. So I wonder if the guy, if he actually wrote down, "He wrote me this way." But it makes sense because the story is a meta story about a guy writing a story that changes the world, and he's being told by this, and then they make a movie of it. So it's actually cool because we're actually seeing the next iteration. Like, we are seeing the movie that they haven't. I guess at the end of the movie, he watches the movie in the movie. He's laughing about it. That part's pretty cool.
So great. I love it.
It is complicated. Wow, this is like the burrito inside the burrito wrapped around a taco.
It's a crunch wrap supreme.
Christopher Nolan, eat your heart out.
If Sutter Kane isn't writing everything, then there are scenes where he focuses in the book. There are scenes where he focuses not on John Trent, supposedly. Which means that during those scenes that Sutter Kane does not write, John Trent might actually have some free will.
I think that's a good point. So, to me, it seems like the characters have free will until a plot point comes up, and then they have to do a certain thing. So, you know how he like doesn't want to submit the manuscript and spread the word of Sutter Kane, but then when he comes to, which supposedly would be like the parts that aren't written when he has free will, he realizes he did all that stuff unbeknownst to him.
Yeah. A lot happens that he was like not even aware of. He kind of, his brain kind of skips a few months.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an interesting question about everyone in the movie because a lot of them, like Linda doesn't have free will at a certain point for sure, or possibly even before that. There's the paper boys. He's just riding past the town and he gets sort of sucked into the vortex of it.
Oh my god, that was the creepiest thing, and I love it so much. I was like, that's so crazy that he just has to ride this one path over and over again, and he literally gets older and older and then starts again.
Yeah. I didn't realize that he was stuck in a time loop. It's kind of neat because even Sutter Kane himself is like devoid of free will because at the end, like, he turns into his own book. He becomes paper and his face rips.
Right.
So
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Like, does Kane himself even have free will? I mean, he says that he realizes at a certain point that he's not even in control of what he's writing, that he's only putting down what they tell him to write.
And I guess the mouthpiece of they is that Total Recall lookalike baby thing on his back.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck was that? I think something similar happens with, like, Pikmin, who, she has, like, her husband chained to her leg, and then she turns into an octopus. Which is actually pretty cool. So Pikmin is a direct reference to Pikmin's Model, which is a Lovecraft story, in which a painter paints these gruesome portraits of creatures and whatnot that everyone is like, wow, this guy has a crazy imagination. And sorry, spoiler alert, at the end of this 7-page enormous story, his friend finds a photograph of one of the monsters, and it turned out that he was painting actual portraits of things that were real, not fantasies. That's why in the movie, Sam Neill asks the woman if she painted the pictures on the wall. I think this is important because I think that in one of the stories she had maybe painted the paintings on the wall, but not in this one. So I think that while all these stories are intermingling, there's also rewrites happening. So the plot point of the kids taking her as a mother might have just been written out because Styles was written out. So there is this like melding of fiction and reality into just madness. So I think there's always going to be a certain kind of structure that doesn't make sense in this movie.
Yeah.
It's widely experimental. It starts off not that experimental. I mean, it has the flash forward to him screaming, "I'm not insane," which is, of course, how every Lovecraft story opens. And then it goes back, and it's literally just a film noir for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It is the basic plot of every film noir.
Which is why I knew that he was fake when the movie started.
Really?
Because they do it so well. I'm like, oh, he's one of Sutter Kane's characters. Like, I immediately knew, because the way that they write him and the way that he acts and his theme music, you're like, he's too much of a character. He's not a real person yet.
Oh, wow. Good catch.
He feels like Jack Nicholson's character from Chinatown.
Yeah.
That's kind of his whole deal.
Like that, even that opening scene with him where he's in his office, you have all the Venetian blinds, and he is talking to someone who is trying to run a scam but has cheated on his wife, so she ratted him out. And I'm like, that's like, it's just the opening scene to Chinatown. With the anamorphic lens and the side lighting, the strong contrasty lighting, it's a film noir.
Which I think at times they pull off really well. I think there's a lot of parts of this movie that don't look that great to me, and some of the special effects. I think they're too willing to show it to you at times, which is odd because, you know, we covered The Thing at the beginning of this podcast, and I thought that's a great looking movie, and almost all the prosthetic work looks amazing in that, and it's mostly backlit. In this movie, they kind of show it to you a little bit more.
To me, the worst part was when we saw, it's not an animatronic, what I thought it was. It was a miniature of Mrs. Pickman chopping up her husband. And I was like, oh, this isn't as good as The Thing, which was how many years before this? At least a decade.
82, so 12 years before.
No, yeah, The Thing looks way better. And I think the monsters chasing him at the end might look worse.
Yeah, but the monsters are dope. I do like the monsters.
And, like, that's kind of the deal with this movie. Like, a lot of it looks, like, not great, but it's cool.
I think that's kind of intentional to some extent as well. I mean, like, the paperboy, when he becomes an old man, like, doesn't look like realistic age makeup at all. They also could have literally just gotten an old man, and they said, no, we're going to age him with makeup, and it's going to look kind of Uncanny Valley, and that's the point. It's not supposed to be perfect makeup all the time. It's supposed to look like, what the fuck is this? What is going on? And that's why I think it actually works really well.
I think there might even be a little bit of that with the dialogue, because, like, at times the dialogue seems wrong, but then you hear later that he rewrote the scene, and you're like, oh, maybe in the beginning when he's talking to Styles and Charlton Heston, that really awkward scene when she's holding the mug and things. That whole scene is so awkward. And then he's, like, hitting on her, and it's like, it doesn't really work with his character. It's strange.
That's why I feel like Styles is real in that moment, because she isn't, like, falling for his, like, cool character stuff that is obviously written in the book, right? Like, him smoking a cigarette and having to put it out, she's like, fuck no. Like, and she doesn't seem like a femme fatale in, like, this noir sense. Maybe a little bit, but she also, like, just doesn't call him out on his bullshit. It almost feels, I don't know, it almost feels like she's real.
Yeah, she doesn't read as a femme fatale at all, right?
Yeah.
Well, when she becomes a monster, yeah, but...
Yeah, but that's not really a femme fatale. That's her, like, that's more of a damsel.
We don't see it happen, but she does, like, go after in pursuit of Sutter Kane, and, like, she makes the choice to, like, go into the church and...
Yeah. She's doing her job, but it's not the typical, it's not the typical two-faced femme fatale of, like, I've double-crossed you and broken your heart. Now you got to go after me, but really I'm dangerous. And I'm this other person you don't know about. He calls her on her con from the get-go. It's kind of the opposite of a femme fatale, because at the end it turns out she's better than he initially gave her credit for.
That's fair, yeah.
That's kind of a femme fatale trope as well, though. I mean, again, Chinatown, that's Faye Dunaway's character. I don't want to spoil Chinatown. You should watch Chinatown.
Yeah, don't spoil Chinatown. But yeah, maybe you're
Jesus
you're
Christ,
right.
if you haven't watched Chinatown by now, just, like, pause this podcast, go watch this fucking movie, and then come back and finish this whole entire episode, and then 3 more before.
It's not horror, but it will chill you to your bones.
So David, you like the makeup throughout the movie, right?
Yeah.
We're just going to say, okay. And I think Devin's more on my path, where at times it's good, at times it's not.
Yeah, but I kind of like David's interpretation of it now. Like, it maybe it's almost purposeful. Because it is, to me, it's weird to, like, see John Carpenter, who's, like, so well known for, like, knowing how to handle these special effects and make them look fucking awesome on screen, to put something up that looks less than great. But also, like, I don't know. It's a cool interpretation. We don't know what happened on set. It kind of works. It's kind of...
It's one of those weird experimental movies where, like, It's genre bending. There's a lot of different things happening. You don't really know what you're getting. It's not scary per se.
It's pretty fucking scary, man.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh my god, the most terrifying line to me, I had to write it down. I think Styles says it. Humans will be a myth. They're like, one day humankind is just going to be a bedtime story.
It's this, like, existential horror, I think. That
Yeah.
I mean, the entire premise of the movie is that reality is flexible. The way we think of the universe is that there is a truth. There is a base concept that is what is real that we are observing.
Mm-hmm.
But according to this movie, that's not true. According to this movie, reality is strictly what we perceive it to be. And if we all started perceiving something else, then that would become reality.
Yeah.
And there's also this complete distinct lack of control that, you know, we have like the freedom to influence our own lives and shift the course of reality in the world and history and stuff. And this is completely taking that out of our hand to where we could just be written out of existence with a torn page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So it is completely existential, and it's cosmic because there are creatures coming from space or wherever to influence Sutter Kane's. He's like the kid in that Twilight Zone episode who can think things and they happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that. That's a cosmic horror or existential horror story.
I also kind of connected to Rocco's Basilisk. I know you're familiar with this, Rob. Devin, have you heard
Yeah.
of this?
No, but also please explain it for our listeners.
Great. Little content warning. This might kill you, but it won't. But just be aware.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Okay, yeah. But please explain it.
Rocco's Basilisk is a thought experiment regarding a future artificial intelligence that will someday exist, which is omnipotent and will punish everyone who knew about it and did not help bring it into existence. So, by now being made aware of Rocco's Basilisk by me, you are either doomed to be punished by this thing when it exists, or you must help it come into creation. I mean, the guy who proposed this was actually arguing that we definitely should not bring this thing into creation, but that's beside the point.
Oh, I don't know. To me, okay, what I was going to go off of before, and like I think this kind of fits into it too, is like, that is religion?
Yeah, little
Kind
bit,
of.
yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I don't want to offend anybody, but like, I may just offend fucking people here. But, you know, some of religious backstory or how other people can view other people's religions as well is just like, it is a belief that comes to be, not necessarily that is, because not all these religions can be at the same time. So one of them has to be not necessarily real, right? And so like, but because we believe in it, then it comes into existence, like you were saying for the basilisk, David, and then it becomes like the truth of our world. And I think that ties in with what you were saying earlier, Rob, and what this movie says too. It's like the reality that we live in is the one that we choose to believe in.
Yeah.
That's a good comparison. The basilisk has also been compared to Pascal's wager, which is an old argument that you should choose to believe in God because if you believe in God and God isn't real, it doesn't really hurt you that much. But if you don't believe in God and God is real, then you're going to be doomed to burn in hell. And there are a million logical fallacies with this argument, but the comparison has been made between Basilisk and Pascal's wager.
Yeah, Pascal's wager is very common among people who, if you talk to them about religion, they'll kind of bring it up without calling it Pascal's wager. But
it's a terrible
I've definitely
argument.
spoken to people. Well, I not necessarily, but it is super similar. I mean, to the Basilisk in that we have this design system that you're supposed to go towards, and if you don't, then you're punished severely for it. And even if you were to read like the, we're always talking about Genesis. In the beginning, God spoke the word, and that was. So it's always starting from the word and it's becoming. And that's not only in Catholicism or in Judaism. There's other religions where it usually starts with the word. I think in some of the Hindu religions, it's similar. Like Om is the first word spoken that created things. It always starts with a word and a thought. And a lot of the ideas, chanting in general or praying, any kinds of chants, is bringing things into existence through breath.
I love that. And one of the lines in this film is Kane says this, "I think, therefore you are."
Yeah. He also compares himself to God. He says that his work has sold more copies than the Bible, and then at some point he outright calls his book, In the Mouth of Madness, the new Bible.
Which, like, yeah, that's exactly what it is in the context of the movie, right?
Yeah.
But it's also ballsy because he's trying to compare himself to God, but he's being controlled by these other beings. So
Right.
he's really just a patsy.
Well, I mean, he's like the mouthpiece of God.
Yeah.
He's the mouth
Yeah.
of madness.
Ah.
That was pretty damn good.
Actually, off of that, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about this one thing. Earlier, you guys were talking about whether or not Sutter Kane is actually real and if he has free will, and you just mentioned it, David, because these things are basically telling him what to do. What if he's not real? And I mean, like, because all the quotes from the book are actual legit quotes from H.P. Lovecraft, and like he obviously, like you said, is resembling, and all these stories are resembling Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft. So what if he is just, what am I saying here? Well, we know Stephen King exists in this world because he's mentioned, because Sutter Kane outsells Stephen King. So what if H.P. Lovecraft is, or what if Sutter Kane is just like a vessel through which to pump out these stories? I don't know really what I'm saying, but there's like there's something here where I feel like he's fake.
Yeah,
I hear you.
Yeah.
That basically he is a creation of the elder gods in order to spread their word, is what you're saying, essentially, right?
Right, but that he's not actually real, and that he actually just like re-spews words that have already been said, but like H.P. Lovecraft, but with the blessing from the old ones.
Right. But since the story In the Mouth of Madness is about Sutter Kane writing this book, we don't even really know if Sutter Kane is the real writer, right?
Right. So maybe Stephen King or H.P. Lovecraft wrote it.
Or
Michael DeLuca wrote it.
Exactly, right? Yeah, the screenwriter wrote it, and
Okay,
it's
but
a
he didn't
meta
actually
movie
write
on
it
that.
because he also adapted it from Lovecraft.
Yeah, sort of. There's this like ongoing old myth that Lovecraft and his mythos was him actually contacting the old gods, and they were the ones telling him to write this stuff.
Stop,
Yeah.
that's creepy as hell.
Yeah, and no one even wanted to
cool.
publish his shit when he was writing for the most part.
Oh. All right, guys. Before we move on to our second film, though, I want to take a break right here to hear a word from our sponsor.
The devil is in the details. Trim your nails before reading this one. The terrifying visuals might have you clawing at your eyes. The author of Ped, Flanagan, and Buds, James Longmore, just re-released one of his finest horror novels, Tenebrion. Amateur filmmakers break into an abandoned school to perform and film an authentic black mass, inadvertently invoking a demon. The malevolent demon of darkness requires particular circumstances and sacrifices to rend a fissure between the worlds and set free its brethren. It has manipulated humans for centuries to put things into place, and the movie makers are the unfortunate final pieces of this nefarious puzzle. The filmmakers will attempt to return Tenebrion to the pit of Hades, as it hunts them all down one by one for inclusion in its hellish gateway. You can find the novel on Amazon or check for a link in the description of this episode. Now, back to the show.
Now we're back from our brief break for our second film of the night, which also has to do with stories in reality within stories, and they're meta, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But this is another franchise, not quite as old as the Lovecraft one, but probably even more well known. This is Devin Shepard giving you guys the plot synopsis.
After 5 successful Nightmare on Elm Street movies, New Line Cinema, yes, the same studio that did Mouth of Madness, decides to kill Freddy Krueger and end the franchise once and for all. Heather Langenkamp is welcoming this end. She can finally leave Nancy and Freddy behind to focus on spending time with her special effects artist husband and their son, but Freddy isn't done with her yet. Mysterious events begin to plague her, threatening phone calls, cataclysmic earthquakes, and nightmares. Oh, those nightmares. Heather dreams Freddy is back, and he's after her and her family. She's determined to get to the bottom of this, asking for help from her fellow Elm Street actors Robert Englund and John Saxon, and producers Sarah Risher and Bob Shea. But only one person has the answer. Real-life Wes Craven. Wes has recently been compelled to write a new Elm Street script, in which Freddy is in the form of an ancient evil that is looking to break into the real world. This is Wes Craven's new nightmare.
Yeah!
Oh, this is the shit David lives for.
Freddy's my favorite. So, to start us off, I've got a little question for you. Do you read Sutter Kane? In seriousness, though, why do you think that this had to be a Freddy movie? The plot feels like it could have worked with a lot of different things, but it was specifically Freddy Krueger. Aside from the fact that it's Wes Craven writing it and Freddy is his character, what purpose, both in terms of the plot and in terms of meta-ness, do you think that Freddy serves specifically?
So, was Freddy Krueger, like, the ultimate horror monster at this time? Like, was he, above all else, just, like, as big as they portray him in this movie? Because, like, we go to the New Line offices in this movie, and he's on every single wall. Bob Shea has, like, all these dolls. Like, it's just, like, it seems like this crazy, crazy fandom. Is that, like, what it actually was in 94?
I don't think so. Not exactly. I mean, there's always Freddy craze, but the franchise was kind of on a decline, and this was a way to kind of spark it back up. So I think it is kind of exaggerated. But, I mean, Freddy Krueger, everyone knows who he is. Like, you show the claw to, like, little kids, they know what that is.
Right.
It's not exaggerated, though, because the entire point in the movie is that he is on the decline, and that's why the demon is able to be coming into the real world. That if Freddy was still at the height of his popularity, the demon wouldn't be able to do that.
Well, and I think that's exactly the answer then, David. For me, is because that's kind of exactly what was happening with Freddy. And Wes Craven is kind of exploring, like, what are the implications of Freddy leaving or coming out of the zeitgeist.
I like to think of it in terms of it's kind of like the It monster, this cosmic horror that comes out of space, this alien entity that latches on to things you're afraid of. But in this case, it latches on to a scary script, and the monster, Freddy, goes in your dream and shows you what you're afraid of, and that's how it gets its power. But I think, as David will tell you, it's kind of the reverse of It, or even Mouth of Madness, in that the story traps it, not the other way around. You know, rather than spreading the word contains it. But does it have to be Freddy? No, but I mean, I don't know. It's a weird question.
Yeah, I mean, could it have worked if it was Jason instead?
Not really. Not as well, because then, like, the dream aspect wouldn't work as well. You know, you can't show what you're afraid of. If it's just Jason, it's like, okay, now it just walks around, it breathes. Like, the whole idea of Freddy is that he's not really in reality, and the only way to eliminate it at the end of the movie is always pulling him into the reality. You got to get a hold of this thing. And the way you get a hold of this thing, rather than literally grabbing it like she does in the first film, in this one, it's Wes Craven grabbing it with his pen or his typewriter.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see this as Wes Craven's philosophy of horror in general.
Yes.
That this is like his thesis statement, pretty much. These are a few quotes of Craven. He says, "You don't enter the theater and pay your money to be afraid. You enter the theater and pay your money to have the fears that are already in you when you go into a theater dealt with and put into a narrative." Stories and narratives are one of the most powerful things in humanity. They're devices for dealing with the chaotic danger of existence. It's like boot camp for the psyche, and real-life human beings are packaged in the flimsiest of packages, threatened by real and sometimes horrifying dangers, events like Columbine. But the narrative form puts these fears to a manageable series of events that gives us a way of thinking rationally about our fears. Horror films don't create fear, they release it. Like all of these quotes, there are more of them. Throughout his entire career, he kept talking about horror as this vehicle for confronting the things that terrify us and approaching them in a safe environment to be able to control them. And that's literally what happens in the movie.
And that's why I love him so much. I think my entire horror philosophy is based on exactly everything that Wes Craven has taught me.
Aside from his earliest movies, the protagonist always survives. They always win. They always are able to defeat the evil.
I will correct that, and like they don't just like survive, they fucking like fight back. And like I think Nancy is like the perfect, well, before Sydney Prescott, but Nancy is like the perfect example of how Wes Craven writes these protagonists and how they fight back. And I mean, he even says this in New Nightmare. He's like, you know, Heather, you gave Nancy her power. Like, she could defeat Freddy because you gave her power, and you're the only one that can defeat Freddy now, which is just like such an empowering and emotional moment. It's so cool to watch. Like, horror actresses like usually get the bad end of the stick, and they're like, oh, you just scream around with your top off half the time. But like Heather Langenkamp, like in this film, and I mean in everything else before, but especially in this film because she plays herself, is like, no, like, I'm a mom, but I'm not just a mom. Like, I'm a wife, but I'm not just a wife. Like, I'm an actress, and I have all these, like it shows her full entire life, and it shows everything that she's, like, going through, and it's just, like, oh, just so good to see on screen.
Yeah. She definitely takes control of the situation and doesn't need no man.
Literally, yeah.
I saw recently an interview with Barbara Crampton where she was talking about the word scream queen, and she said she doesn't really like that term. That kind of demotes what she's doing and what many other actors are doing into just screaming and being there, and makes it seem like it's an easy thing. And she's like, no, we like are bringing life to these characters. We're doing a lot more than just screaming.
Yeah, especially if you think of screaming as literally. So to go back to your idea of like kind of how these stories are a way of us dealing with our own fears, there's a pretty recent philosophy book called Strangers, Gods, and Monsters by Richard Kearney, who I believe I think he's an Irish philosopher. I think he's writing via Ireland. And he talks a lot about this kind of, he calls it a hermeneutic approach, but it's a way of like reading stories narratively, and how horror movies take these fears that we have troubles describing and gives us a way of directly describing them, being able to view them and deal with them. And that's why the best horror movies usually have to do with some sort of fear we're currently dealing with, whether it's in reaction to some sort of global event, such as a pandemic, a terrorist attack, a war, like in one of our recent episodes, Under the Shadow. So I think Wes Craven is tapping into that idea of it's very healthy to describe these kinds of fears of ours and put them in a place such as cinema or a story.
1000%, yeah.
Which is cool, because if we are going to compare it to the other movie, it is kind of the opposite, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, yeah.
Yeah. David, I think I got to give him credit. He's the one who decided to order these movies from the pessimistic to the more optimistic.
So in how these horrors are reflected, how real life horrors are reflected in horror cinema, what do you guys see as the real life horrors that are in New Nightmare?
So there's this idea that you're trading your job for your life, right? That your career kind of takes over for you. There's this other fear of like kind of aging out of what you're meant to be. You know, there's this other fear of being stuck in your career. They're almost all career oriented.
There's also just literally, I mean, her husband dies half an hour into the movie. It's also just a fear of being alone. It's a fear of not knowing how to raise your child, that he might have some sort of disorder. I mean, the movie talks a lot about mental illness as well. Although in this movie, the mental illness does not make anyone dangerous, and it's also, I mean, they're not mentally ill. Freddy is real, but it's a distrust of doctors trying to take their child away from them.
Well,
it's kind of a fear of horror movies in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a fear of doctors. I think, well, I'd heard this on YouTube, that she was a stand-in for the MPAA. Kind of like
that is definitely a Wes Craven thing.
Yeah. Right? What I really enjoyed about this film, being in the film industry myself, and you two can relate to this, is that it's critical of the long hours that we work. Because her husband dies falling asleep at the wheel, which is a real life concern for people working in the film industry. And from what I've heard, it's a bigger concern abroad, where they work even crazier hours.
There's a movement right now that's gaining not that much traction, unfortunately, to try to limit that and get better rest breaks. But I mean, it's not, doesn't seem to be going anywhere. We'll see what happens. That it was heavily discussed at the beginning of the pandemic, and then everyone kind of just forgot about it. But there's a line in the movie when, you know, Heather calls her husband. She's freaking out because of everything that's happening. And the strange calls that she's getting from a toxic fan, who she thinks is a toxic fan. And he says, okay, I'm on my way home. He's like, he's the good husband. He's going to come right there. He's not leaving her to deal with this on her own. He believes her. He says, I'm coming right home. I'll be there in 3 hours.
Yeah.
I just laugh hysterically every time at that line because it's so fucking real.
Yeah. Especially in LA where they are, you know. It's like there you gotta drive somewhere. It's like, all right, I'll be there in 5-6 hours. See you soon. It's like, okay.
And this is on top of working 12-hour days every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no surprise that he falls asleep at the wheel, which is just terrifying.
12 hours if you're lucky, because most crew members have to get there earlier and unpack, and then they have to load out at the end of the day. So it's usually a 13-hour day.
He might have been having shorter days at that point because he wasn't actually shooting. He was prepping.
Yeah, he also left midday, supposedly. Like, he didn't work a full day because he left early.
But he's working this every day, 5 days a week. But then, like, even then your weekends are never really weekends when you're working in film.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how the fuck we're able to record a podcast while working in film. It makes no sense.
It's absurd. I know. I gotta be on set tomorrow.
Oh my god.
No, it's really interesting. But David, you said one thing that wow, I did it. Heather thinks that she has a toxic, like a stalker.
Yeah.
I don't think she does. Like, I don't think she does think that. Like, yes, it was established that she had a stalker who would call. But at this point that the calls start happening, she's already having nightmares. And she already thinks that something else is happening. And it's actually everyone else telling her, oh no, nothing's happening. It's just your stalker. Oh, it's your stalker. And like literally everyone's telling her, like they're not listening to her and they're telling her it's just the stalker.
Which is a common theme throughout the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, that no one ever believes the heroes that they're being stalked by Freddy in their dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but come on, that's so fantastical.
But I think in this one there is a little while before she actually starts thinking like maybe something is actually going on that is supernatural because
it's
live
realistic.
In a supernatural, no one would think that.
Yeah, she's not in a movie. Like this isn't a movie in this world.
It's like why would she think a character in one of her movies is coming to life? That's fucking absurd.
Yeah.
It's
great.
Yeah, it kind of mixes that idea of like the deranged fan is usually the one who mixes the reality with the fiction, but in this case it's the actress, which is cool. So like, you know, actresses they'll have these or actors, they'll have these deranged fans who envision they have some sort of relationship that they've just fabricated in their own mind, and then they start stalking them and things, right? You always hear that story of the famous person comes home and they see someone they don't know in their house who pretends to be their spouse or girlfriend. You're like, what the fuck? But in this one, it's her who is like, the division is on her end. It's not on the fans' end.
I mean, fans who aren't necessarily trying to be creepy often come off as creepy throughout the movie. Like, even there's her driver in one of the first scenes starts like saying, oh, you're that girl in the movie? Oh yeah, and Freddy was chasing you. I love all this like creepy stuff that happened to you. And it comes off really bizarre. Like, he doesn't mean to freak her out, but he's clearly like tapping into what she's going through with a stalker calling her and pretending to be Freddy.
Yeah. I like how that's so creepy when the tongue comes through the phone and licks her in the face.
It's so good.
Which,
such
of
a
course,
great
is a
scene.
callback to the original movie.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's also this idea of like how close your fans want to get with you. I think it taps into that too. I really love how this movie makes use of the claw. And I felt like the claw was kind of missing in some of the later sequels. And this brings it back to where it front and center, this is about Freddy Krueger. And what is Freddy Krueger? Freddy Krueger is his 5-fingered claw.
Yeah.
Which they also redesigned. Did you guys like the redesign of the claw?
I do, actually.
I did, yeah.
I mean, I think the effects in this movie, similar to the last one, which is interesting because it's actually the same effects team.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's
In the same year? In the same year?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Those guys are super prolific. I mean, one of them, Robert Kurtzman, went on to direct Wishmaster. The other one, Greg Nicotero, is like, I think the showrunner. The showrunner just directs a lot of episodes of the Shudder Creepshow series. Like, all these guys are super prolific and have done a lot of stuff. But I will say, I think that the Freddy mask in this movie looks the fakest of all the Freddy masks throughout the movies. But I also, again, think that that's, like, kind of works with it because he's not a burn victim. It's not the Freddy Krueger. It is a demon that is shape-shifting to look like Freddy Krueger. It's not literally burns anymore.
Yeah, there were points where I was like, is that Robert or not? Like, I actually, like, had to question it sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually Freddy Krueger. The credits have it's Freddy Krueger as himself.
Love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I really don't like the mask in this one. I like the claw a lot. The claw looks cool.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason the claw, I think, really works is that, going off that same idea, it's no longer a glove. It is just part of his hand now.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, and the whole redesign of Freddy is like, he's more muscular and more veiny, and he's more like coming to be. It reminds me a little bit of Hellraiser when Frank is like being formed.
I really like it when the little kid tapes the knives to his hand. I think that's an awesome scene.
That kid was so fucking scary. It scared the crap out of me. I thought it was like, he was like the scariest kid I've ever seen in a horror movie.
Same kid from Pet Sematary, I just found out.
Fuck yeah. Yeah.
He was also in Kindergarten Cop. Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
Okay.
That part?
I'm not familiar with that movie.
You don't know
fuck.
Kindergarten Cop?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the famous scene, Who's Your Daddy and What Does He Do? And the kid stands up and he goes, boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. And the whole class starts laughing.
Oh no. Oh my god. Okay, Robert Englund, fucking snack.
It's a snack?
What?
I'm
you
so attracted to him.
Really?
Wow, okay.
I mean, Kurt Russell, I get, but okay, yeah.
Wait. England in or out of makeup? That's what I want to know.
Oh, okay. He has to have those blue little sunglasses that he has in almost every scene of this movie.
That is so funny. I did not expect you to say that at all. That's awesome. Okay, what do you guys think are the main points of comparison between these two?
Well, obviously, they're both about someone writing something that's coming to life, and we talked a bit about the concept of free will in A Mouth of Madness, but I think that applies to New Nightmare as well.
Yeah, for instance, the kid climbs to the top of the playground because it was in the script, and at the end of the movie, she's reading the script as he asks, what is that? Is that a story?
But she does change the line. She adds the word "yeah" to a line.
Wait,
Yeah.
really?
Uh-huh. It's like one of the last lines in the movie. She picks up the script. The kid says, "Oh, is that a story?" And in the script, it says his line, then it says her line is, "It's a story," but she says, "Yeah, it's a story."
Yeah.
And then she starts reading the script, and they cut before they get to the part where she reads her husband dying.
We should start having a segment where it's Superscript Supervisor, and David comes in and is like, here's all the things that were incorrect and inconsistent with these movies.
Well, with this one, though, they had to have noticed that at least when they were editing, probably even sooner, and they had to have been like, oh no, yeah, let's have her change the line. And I don't know if they thought about what that actually means for the story, but it does imply that the script itself does not have to be verbatim. Which is also partly that's an ad-lib that happens on every single movie.
Yeah, but I don't think it's like Wes Craven isn't writing what happens and controls what happens. He's seeing these in his dream.
Yeah.
And then writes down what happens. So it's not like there's no control. There's only...
Yeah, it does raise that question. It's not clear, I think. I mean, he writes some scenes before they happen.
Yeah, but also he captures the entity by writing the script. So it's not
Yes.
the entity telling him the story. It's not like in The Mouth of Madness.
The entity does not want him to write the script.
No. The entity, yeah, exactly. The entity wants to leave and run around as Freddy Krueger as something else and cause havoc.
So what is giving Wes these dreams that causes him to write?
I think it's the entity leaving. He has some sort of like link to it because it was his story that had captured it.
It might be in the same way that the entity has to go after Heather. It also has to have that same link to Wes. And it's implied that it has a link to Robert Englund as well. We don't see exactly what happens to him. He might have just ran out of town to get away from it. He might have been killed by it. We're not given an answer to that.
Well, I'm just glad they did do the route where Robert Englund turns into Freddy Krueger.
No, of course not. That would have been ridiculous.
Do you think Wes and Carpenter like got together and were like, we're making meta movies, or it was like a contest between them, or was it just accidental that they both made meta movies about horror movies at the same year at the same time?
I think it's accidental.
Yeah, you don't think there's like, and with the same effects team, don't you think it's like, oh, this is kind of like the other movie Wes just did? Sounds like, no, not at all. His is about a script. Mine's a book. Not even close.
You're like, well, it says right here, there's a movie.
No, I feel like it has to say something about what's going on in the 90s at the time, and especially in horror movies, because we just like, we're coming out of the 80s where horror kind of had this free reign to be a little wilder, a little crazier, a lot more gory, and then all of a sudden we see a lot more pressure from the MPAA about what comes out in the theaters, video games, a lot more people becoming like prim and proper
Did that
as
happen?
we're growing up.
This is
What?
before Columbine. Did that happen in the early 90s? Was the MPA doubling down?
Yeah, I think so. That was all about the like Marilyn Manson stuff, Nine Inch Nails, and
It's at least the start of it. Yeah, we're seeing like a lot of people crunch down on music, specifically like
NWA.
you're saying, yeah. And so like we're seeing this pushback against media. And so there has to be, and I mean, Wes Craven is definitely a leader in this, but like this has to be a response to that in some sort of way. And I think, well, multiple times throughout New Nightmare too, Wes is like, there are hints and pushbacks, which I love so much, against just like how people react to horror movies in general. One specifically that comes to mind is when Heather is doing the on-screen interview and the interviewer is like, do you let your son watch these horror movies? And she's like, no, but it's not because they're not scary. Or, I mean, she doesn't actually get to finish her sentence because that scene is so well done and she's out of control there because he's being very pushy. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of hints about that throughout this film in particular.
okay, religious symbols in these movies. Both these films have religious symbols. In particular, I'm thinking of the cross. So in the beginning of In the Mouth of Madness, John is drawing crosses all over his padded cell. And the Heather's child in A New Nightmare climbs to the top of the playground and makes the form of a cross before he falls off, and she does like a fucking NFL dive and catches him, which is really cool.
Yeah.
What do you guys think both these movies are saying about religion? And is it a similar thing or is it different?
I actually think it's pretty different. I mean, Craven was raised, I think, Catholic, and very strictly so. He didn't really watch horror movies as a kid. He's talked about how religion gave him a lot of this fear that he brings into his movies, that he kind of attributes it with a lot of his fucked up mind. But Freddy is, if you haven't seen all the movies, Freddy's mother is actually a nun who was raped. She is often used as a force to battle against him. So Freddy kind of works in the same way a vampire, where if you hold a cross up to him, it will help to hurt him. He's also literally a demon in this movie.
There's a problem with that, though, David, because I think Wes Craven wasn't using any of the movies in between the first and this one. So was his mother a nun in the first movie?
No, not established.
No. So I don't think the nun even exists in this world, per se. It might.
But there is still religious symbols, and I think that it can all connect.
There are. But I think the other movies are more pro-religious in that way. Like, the nun is a way of combating
for sure.
Krueger. I don't know if religion is really viewed in a very positive light in this rendition.
No, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the fiction and reality thing, and about, you know, something that obviously Mouth of Madness explores. And I actually have a quote from Craven about that scene that you mentioned in particular, Rob, because he says that is one of the most moving scenes that he's done, especially in the film. And he says, quote, "It's one of the more profound moments in humanity, you know, when one's faith is contradicted by the events that happen." And I mean, describing that scene a little more, it's the boy reaching towards heaven to join his father. And then, what does he say after he falls? It's like, God didn't want me.
He's trying to reach God. Oh, yeah, God didn't want me.
Yeah.
He does say that.
And it was so sad. But it's him kind of realizing that, like, him having that moment that maybe God doesn't exist.
Oh, that's interesting.
And something that he believed in isn't necessarily real, which ties into believing in Freddy, whether or not he's real, believing in Sutter Kane, et cetera, whether or not, you know, the reality is what we make of it, essentially.
Yeah, that's kind of neat, because in both these movies, like, a malevolent cosmic force has more control over reality than what we might think is God. And you can kind of view both movies as almost atheistic.
I don't think In the Mouth of Madness is strictly atheistic, but I think that the way that the plot works, the reason that he's drawing crosses to try and combat it, I think, is that before the book In the Mouth of Madness sells and transforms reality into the Sutter Kane narrative, the Bible was the big thing that everyone believed in. And per the rules of this movie, that means that previously the Bible would have been true.
Interesting.
Oh, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I think the movie is saying that reality is what we make of it. So, yeah, if everyone believes in religion, then religion would become true.
Right.
Is an argument that the movie is saying. It doesn't necessarily say that's a good thing, but it is saying that.
So if everyone were to just read the Bible and become religious overnight, you would beat Sutter Kane.
But the Bible also has some extremely brutal and violent imagery in it as well. And I think that both movies kind of acknowledge that religion is a bit of horror itself.
Yeah. I mean, and New Nightmare even, like, acknowledges that, you know, these fairy tales that we tell our kids growing up are horrific and terrible, and it's like, hey, stop ratting on fucking horror movies. Like, you guys have been telling these stories for literally hundreds of years, thousands of years. Like,
yeah, I'm so stupid for taking like 5 viewings of this movie or whatever before I realized that they kill Freddy the same way they kill the witch in Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, they have the breadcrumbs of the pills, and yeah.
And when she's reading him Hansel and Gretel earlier in the movie, when she gets into more disturbing imagery, she wants to stop, and he's like, no, keep going. And it's this moment of her being like almost creeped out by her son, and he wants to keep reading this horrifying stuff. But then they get to the next part, and it's like, oh, then they go home, and their father showers them with kisses, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we got through the horror stuff, and now it's just nice.
Yeah, again, like, stop, hey, all these people, stop judging horror movies by these, like, specific moments of gore, and, like, maybe you should actually look at the movie as a whole, like we do on this podcast every single time. It's just like, what are we actually talking about here, and how are we actually discussing the world at large through the lens of horror? Like, there's not necessarily a happy ending, but there's an ending that... There's more to the story than these horrific moments, essentially.
So what does that mean for In the Mouth of Madness, which literally does the exact opposite?
Yeah, it does the exact opposite. It's kind of like the most fucking pessimistic thing, and I'm, like, freaked out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, In the Mouth of Madness is just kind of like a true, just horror apocalyptic story, that there are beings outside of our control, and they can just come in directly and, like, start squishing us like ants, you know?
But not right away, because when you dig more into the lore of In the Mouth of Madness and start to look at it more closely, there seems to be a theme. So Sutter Kane's books are always influencing people. It's always been churning people crazy, which the publishing company just writes off as like, oh, no. Those were unstable people. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. No.
But then it gets worse and worse with each book until this new one they're able to really take hold. And it seems like they needed to cement themselves. I don't know that they're all powerful because they need to get people to really believe it. And that's why they pick this crappy pulp paperback hack as their writer, because that's what's popular, that's what's going to sell, that's what people are going to read.
Yeah, but I mean, John does mention that he's much better than he thought he would be. Kind of like a Stephen King type symbol, you know? You think Stephen King's just writing these like horror stories, but actually he's very, very talented.
Yeah, he's super talented. As was H.P. Lovecraft, despite the racism.
Yeah, well,
fair.
yeah, there's a lot of racism.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Little disclaimer: H.P. Lovecraft is kind of a racist, just so you know. I think we're all probably going to have the same answer to this question, but these two movies seem to present very different ideas of what effects horror can have. Which one do you guys think is correct? Or do you think that they both have interesting points?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, obviously I'm going to lean more towards Wes Craven's idea that, you know, horror is a way of dealing with problems and showing it. I mean, I don't think that's the only reason we write horror. I think part of it is just, like, we like being scared, and I think that's healthy. John Carpenter, I don't think, is saying in reality that horror is bad and it can affect us in negative ways. So either. I think it's just that's the horrific idea. Oh, what if these things we love are actually bad for us?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Rob said. I said it before and I'll say it again. Like, Wes Craven's views on horror are like my Bible or my In the Mouth of Madness.
Oh my. Yeah, I mean, I also think Wes Craven has it totally right. But I don't think that there's no value in what In the Mouth of Madness is saying either. I mean, what we haven't touched on too much is that also is talking largely about toxic fandom as well. That it is the fans who take it too far that are bringing about the apocalypse and whatnot.
Well, I actually think that's one of the central points of In the Mouth of Madness. And I think you can view the entire movie in that way. That all these bad things are happening because fans can't differentiate reality from fiction. And I mean, that is a real problem. Like, if we go back to us talking about stalkers and things, people do fabricate these crazy relationships. The one that comes to mind is the person who, I think he tried to send an acid bomb to Bjork.
There was also the guy who shot Reagan in order to impress Jodie Foster.
That's another one. Yeah, these people who fabricate these absurd ideas in their heads. And, you know, you should read these things as for what they are, which is fiction. And, like, they're a lens for viewing the real world, but they're not a real world in and of themselves.
Which is, like, kind of actually applying to more of In the Mouth of Madness, but kind of also says a lot about what Wes Craven is saying about, like, the restrictions and censorship and the pressure on horror films in the 90s.
Yeah, because it takes away from our ability to talk about the real world if you're oppressing and censoring what we can say.
Yeah.
Like, we have to dare to offend, or we're not speaking truthfully. And one of the things about horror films is because they're extreme and they're kind of offensive, they're able to talk truthfully.
Yeah.
About things that actually scare you. Because things that scare you are not going to be things that are not offensive. You're not going to be... I mean, unless the censorship's what's scary, which to me might be.
Yeah, I mean, if In the Mouth of Madness is commenting on this extreme MPA AA doubling down on censorship in the early 90s, then yeah, it makes sense that the ultimate takeaway of the movie is people aren't able to differentiate fiction from reality. And guys, this movie is a fucking work of fiction. The literal ending of the movie, he doesn't just go and watch the movie. He goes in with a giant box of popcorn, which, like, there's no one else in the theater. Where did he get this popcorn?
Love it.
How is there popcorn there?
I love how he's the actor in the movie too. It's like he's watching himself. I'm like, well, how did you have time to act in the movie if you were? I know.
And it's not starring Sam Neill. It should have been starring Sam Neill. Anyway.
Yeah.
That would have been great.
That's another point that I was like, fuck this. I'm so confused.
So I think this is a good time to enter into my favorite part of the show, which is the bone review section, where we review each film on a 1 through 4 bone scale with half bones in between. Starting us off this week is David B. Jacobs.
Man, I fucking love these movies. Both of these movies are among the very best from like the two greatest horror directors that there are, which is of course John Carpenter and Wes Craven. In the Mouth of Madness, it's flawed. Sometimes it feels a bit hokey. There are some threads that don't really lean anywhere, but like, I don't care because it's so brilliant and unique and original and just complete balls to the walls, and it has no fear of doing whatever the fuck it wants to do, and just like, no, you'll figure it out, you'll be fine. And I love surrealist horror so much. I mean, I'm giving that 3.5 bones.
Wow.
And I'm also going to give New Nightmare 3.5 bones.
Wow.
Damn.
It's one of the best Freddy movies. Freddy is my favorite of the slasher characters. And that movie is also flawed. Sometimes the dialogue's kind of hokey. The Freddy makeup is not as good. The CG effects are early 90s CG. But again, I just don't care. My one significant problem is that I think the climax is a little weak, that they could have done more with that. It feels like once she goes into the world, that's like the emotional arcs have been completed, and I'm just like, great, we're good now. And then now we just need to actually fight him. Okay. But I don't mind that much. It's still like a fun scene. And these movies I love these so much, and I'll just watch them over and over again.
Okay, starting with In Mouth of Madness, I said it at the top, I was just like, there are so many things that confuse me, and I think it's not for a lack of them being there, it's just like, they don't necessarily make logical sense, and I kind of want them to a little bit more, or at least like get some sort of just like guide, because then it feels like a little sloppy of a script, and so that docks it for me. I love Sam Neill. It was so cool to see him in this role. The music was really fun. The sets were fucking awesome, and like the whole concept. Well, like, because I have gone through 30 years of life, I've seen this concept many a time, but like there was something about this that like made it fresh and new and exciting. So it was pretty cool. And there were a lot of like really awesome directorial choices. But yeah, just the logic of it all really pissed me off. So I'm going to give it 2.5 bones.
Ooh. It's better than I was expecting.
Yeah, I was going to give 2 bones, but then after this conversation with you guys, I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, that's kind of smart, and I'll get another half.
Watching the movie, I was just like, oh, Devin's gonna hate this movie, so I'm glad that you at least kind of like it.
I'm glad you know my taste. So New Nightmare, I love Wes Craven. I love Wes Craven, and this was just like the most Wes Craven-y nightmare that I had watched, and it was like super fun. Heather's character was just like so well written. I feel like I've said all of this throughout the episode, but yeah, I think it's really strong. It was a slow start for me. It took a while to get there. It kind of felt like a little bit of a, I don't know, drama at first, and then I agree with David, like the ending kind of took a while, but the middle really fucking rocked. So I'm gonna give it 3 bones.
Okay, so I'll also start with In the Mouth of Madness. I'm almost exactly like Devin. I really was going to come in here and give it 2 bones because I'd seen it before and I remembered liking it more. But upon thinking about it, it does have a lot of interesting things. And my main problem with it is I just don't find it scary at all. Like, there's no part of this movie that like scares me. But it's kind of fun, and it has a really neat ending. It's like at the end of the movie when he's laughing in the movie theater, I left the movie being glad I watched it again. So the ending really sells it for me. 2.5 bones. I think it's good. I think it's a good movie, and I think you should watch it. It might not be for everybody, but that surrealist art house, meta genre bending horror thing, it's kind of good, and it's weird. Similarly, A New Nightmare. The first time I'd seen it, I really didn't like it very much, but on this time, I liked it a whole lot more. I don't know what. I don't like Freddy's makeup. It has some good kills, though. It has some pretty bad special effects, some pretty good special effects. That fire at the end looks awful. Yeah, I'm going to give it 2.5. Both these movies get 2.5 bones from me. I think they're good movies. I don't think they're great, but they're interesting, so they're definitely worth seeing. And depending on how interesting you find that meta horror thing, you might give it a higher rating than me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think also part of it, a lot of it is also just that I love surrealist horror so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked before about the things that scare me, and obviously, especially in The Mouth of Madness, just hits all those points.
Definitely a taste.
I'm not huge on meta anything. Anyway, that's it for this week, guys. Thank you for enjoying another episode of Cadaver Dogs. I'm Rob Basercha, and I'll see you next time.
Do you want to play Skin the Cat?
One, two, Cadaver Dogs coming for you.
3, 4, better listen to some more.
5, 6, don't press skip.
9, 10, never
7,
listening
8.
again.
7, 8.
Sorry, I can't fucking count. I think we got it.
Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween.